To get us started, I think I'd like to introduce Dr. Teresita Cruz-del Rosario, who has asked me to call her Tess. Just a brief background on who she is and the kind of work that she's doing now before she starts. Her topic is on migrating out of poverty. She's a formerly visiting associate professor at the New York University in Abu Dhabi, and also the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. She's currently affiliated with the Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore, where she is a research associate. She has written and published 4 books, all written in the tradition of political sociology and public policy. So without further ado, I would like Tess to please start her presentation. Welcome, Tess. Thank you once again for agreeing to be one of our panelist members.
Thank you. Thank you, Zeke, and thank you for this very warm invitation. I'm truly very excited and nervous at the same time. You do this hundreds of times, but each time I'm still nervous. Everybody can hear me okay? Should I adjust my mic? Okay, good. Okay, winter in South Africa, sweltering in Bangkok. It's there's been a heat wave here for the last month, and the air conditioner above me is not working. So
would do anything to stop with you right now.
Right. Yes. Well, me too. I wouldn't mind a touch of winter, actually. Okay, let me start with a novel. And let me share my screen. It's the only PowerPoint slide that I have. Okay, so this novel is entitled The Bamboo Stalk, and it's written by a Kuwaiti author whose name is Saud Al-Sanusi, came out in 2016. And the protagonist, her name is Josephine Mendoza. She is a Filipina domestic worker who left the Philippines so that she can clean Arab homes and wash the clothes of Arab families in Kuwait. In this novel, we learn of Josephine's grievous mistake. She surrendered to the amorous advances of her employer's son, becomes pregnant, and is deported. This tale of migrant labor, emotional involvement, and subsequent abandonment is reconstructed retrospectively by the son, who is the narrator in this novel. His name is Jose. In Arabic, his name is Isam. He concluded that Filipino female migrants are, quote, treated like paper handkerchiefs. Strange men blow their noses on them, throw them on the ground, and walk away. The themes of love, labor, sorrow, betrayal, yearning permeate the novel throughout. The recurrent themes in the narratives of or about female migrant domestic workers who labor both with their hands and with their hearts. Fast forward to Singapore in the new millennium, where I had the privilege to live and work for the last 12 years. The Far East Shopping Center, I'll stop sharing. The Far East Shopping Center and Lucky Plaza on Orchard Road are iconic locations of employment agencies for domestic workers, where they are found nearly every day, but mostly on Sundays during their days off. These agencies facilitate the hiring of female domestic workers recruited mostly from Indonesia, Myanmar, the Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, to serve in local and expatriate households. Every day, the women congregate in any of these offices, spilling over into the corridors as they wait for prospective employers who pour through their folders in search of the ideal housemate. In between hours, these migrant workers tell their stories about cheating spouses, their friends in adulterous liaisons that span the duration of their work permits. They gather for the much-needed self-indulgence of narrative. To cry, to console, to connive, to complain, to plot, to plan, to confide, and confess their personal circumstances that have markedly changed since they left the traditional confines of their homes and their communities. The migration experience is itself a highly emotional process, one that can be characterized as a process of dissociation, nostalgia, adjustment, settlement, renewal, loss, discrimination, abrupt endings, new beginnings, new opportunities, all of which are potent sources of emotion. It is emotions that are the glue to connect domestic workers to families, communities, and to each other. More specifically, love and desire are part and parcel of the migration experience. They remain a central factor among women in the decision-making process. The entire range of emotional liaisons constitute a variety of options for migrants to enrich and reconstitute their emotional lives. These varieties outside the traditional orbit of marriage constitute, I argue, the core of the migration experience, which provides the opportunity for reconfiguring one's identity and social relations. Thus, when I talk about migrating out of poverty, I refer to emotional poverty. And migration is one such strategy which migrants use to enrich themselves and get out of poverty. So migration is not only a financial and economic strategy, but I would argue, first and foremost, an emotional one. One emotional strategy that migrant workers employ is the occasional consensual partnership between domestic workers and non-locals, mostly in the case of Singapore and later on in Thailand, which I will also argue, mostly white Caucasian men. This is often viewed as a step up the social ladder. A liaison, however temporary, is perceived to possess better economic status and represents an improvement in one's social standing and the prospect perhaps of a permanent escape should the Caucasian partner decide to make a formal offer of marriage. In this rather unconventional emotional bargain, both partners are quite unscrupulous and willing to bear the risks, not to mention the emotional costs. I refer here to a situation in which the migrant worker is most likely married and the Caucasian partner is also most likely married, and in a migration situation where they are together in a work situation where both are quote unquote single. Among domestic workers, they experience migration as an emotionally charged undertaking. Migration is a highly emotional project from the very moment of recruitment. In the applicant's folders is a repertoire of skills that constitute the applicant's employability according to the criteria of what the sociologist Arlie Hochschild refers to as emotional labor. In an employment situation, especially in the domestic service sector, there are feeling rules that define the social norms as the appropriate type and amount of emotion that should be displayed in an employment situation. Here's a sample of an applicant's profile that displays the predominant emotional labor, and it reads, name of applicant, whom I shall call Maria, has worked as a helper in Singapore for 10 years. She is a widow with a teenager child, 17 years old. Most likely she is still married, but she recorded her emotional status or civil status as widow. She is a motherly type. This is in her folder. Simple, hardworking, very independent, and can follow instructions and also willing to learn. Nothing about the ability to cook, to keep house. It's all about the kind of emotional labor that is in her application folder. In similar vein, applicants likewise register the conditions of their preferred work environment. Not surprisingly, these conditions are very much related to the emotional setup of their idealized employment. So, in a face-to-face interview, applicants will openly express their impressions of their prospective employers. Mostly, applicants are anxious about their employers as, quote, being too strict or too aloof. Their desire for the ideal employer is one who is approachable and easy to talk to. House helpers consider it a good fortune to work for an employer whom they consider, quote, kind and generous, and to whom they can confide their personal relationships. Several Filipino workers confessed that seeking the confidence of their employers is a form of protection for themselves and their reputation within the Filipino community, especially if they are involved in unconventional emotional liaisons. In Thailand, where I'm currently working and living, the situation is a little bit different. Many migrant workers venture to neighboring Pattaya, Phuket, Koh Samui in southern Thailand. These southern provinces have numerous resorts that attract overseas tourists. The high demand, especially today in the post-pandemic recovery period, there's a high demand for temporary and seasonal workers in these foreign enclaves, and these are easily met by Filipino, Burmese, Lao, and Cambodian women. These workers come from Singapore, Hong Kong, the Middle East, and Europe after their work contracts have expired and have not been renewed by their employers after the 30-day visa has expired. As always, their network of friends, relatives, and neighbors provide the best source of job market information. Thailand is a highly unregulated migration policy regime. It is quite common for domestic workers to enter into emotional liaisons with the locals or with other non-Thais. Visa restrictions are more relaxed than Singapore, and work in the non-formal sector is plentiful. Not surprisingly, the majority of domestic workers in Bangkok are young, unmarried, or separated from their husbands. With flexible working conditions, most domestic workers can meet their financial obligations with a considerable measure of autonomy in contrast to their Singaporean counterparts. They also enjoy the independence afforded by living separately from their employers. So many household workers here in Thailand prefer to live alone rather than be in a live-in situation. Let me give the short example of Marita, her pseudonym, who is a Filipino worker, been living in Thailand for about 10 years. She met her boyfriend, Alex, also not his real name, via Facebook. He is a Filipino employed in Pattaya in the south, while she lives and works in Bangkok, and after having spent 5 years in Singapore. They speak to each other every day on the phone, and they plan their monthly meetings. They alternate their traveling. She goes to Pattaya 1 month, he comes to Bangkok the next month. Marita has chosen to forget the unfaithful husband in the Philippines who ditched her for another woman. The phone liaison with Alex and monthly visits are enough of an emotional fulfillment. Meanwhile, her earnings mostly go to her son, who is finishing a computer course in Manila. When he graduates, she hopes to bring him over to Bangkok, where he can find a job and live with her. Alex is a welcome addition to her life, and the physical distance between them allows her much needed emotional control. She recounts, I have my son to focus on so he can finish his studies. Alex, the boyfriend, is a bonus, and I don't have to live with him or serve him, she declares with much confidence. Like many others who brave the tenuousness of a fickle labor market, Marita has found a workable balance between financial autonomy and emotional sustenance. The trade-offs against job insecurity and exhausting trips to and from the Cambodian border every 2 to 4 weeks is worth the effort. Let me conclude here and open up the discussion later during the Q&A. I use emotional poverty as a framework. I argue that migrant workers within this framework can exercise a limited amount of agency and autonomy. I recognize that there is emotional violence that is very much possible in this framework, and there are many instances in which migrant work can very easily slip into human trafficking, and that happens a lot in this region. The ultimate escape for migrant workers is to find an expatriate spouse, usually Western. In general, however, given the highly segregated worlds between the unskilled and skilled sectors, between migrant workers, domestic workers, and skilled labor, these opportunities and options occur within very narrow margins. Let me end here, and we'll have a discussion later on during the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresita, for giving us another perspective of what migration could look like for those who have decided to take the journey and how it ends onto at the destination country that they find themselves in.